and this is the 27th episode of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over some transfers, some coaching changes in college football in the Big Ten, and then recap what was a pretty awesome Saturday and Sunday slate in college basketball. So, Joe, only a couple headlines for football here, but Ohio State's quarterback Kyle McCord is headed to Syracuse.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. That was probably one of the more bizarre transfer sagas of all time, kind of with all the first entering of it was a little weird, but you know, the fact that that was the least surprising thing of this whole saga was more shocking than anything. You had all the stories about McCord's dad and, some Mon 11 Warriors that you can or can't believe based on how you feel about message boards. Then you had the Nebraska saga and the idea that him and Fleming were a package deal. And then he ends up at Syracuse. I think that's probably a good fit for him. I know very limited. I understand Syracuse is a whole new coaching staff, primarily a New Jersey coaching staff. So I think there's some familiarity there for Mr. McCord, who is from New Jersey. So I think this will be the last you hear of Kyle McCord on this podcast in terms of what he currently does. You might hear him referred to for years past when we talk about football next year, but farewell, Kyle McCord from the Big Ten. Julian Fleming will be choosing pretty soon. Rumor is Penn State's very high up on that list. I do still think he would consider Nebraska due to their great NIL program and the fact he is local to Pennsylvania. Speaking of the Nittany Lions, Sean, Tom Allen. He didn't want to not be mentioned on the In a Nutshell podcast for very long because he is right back in the Big Ten, right back in the old Big Ten East now, Penn State defensive coordinator. That's two straight hires for James Franklin, where he picked a head coach who got fired in the same season to run their defense. As an IU fan, what are your immediate thoughts?
Allen's always been a defensive coordinator in Indiana. He was there first as a DC and then became the head coach. And, I don't think you get more qualified people to be a defensive coordinator in college. You either promote them from within, or you get somebody who's stepping down a level. But familiarity should be there. Obviously not with the new teams because, nobody's played those new teams that'll be in the Big Ten next year. But Allen certainly went from one of the hottest coaches in the country to one of the coldest real quick. So it's good for him that he ends up unemployed for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And he can get into it and, his pathway to a head coaching job is a lot better this way than being a advisor or a positions coach. But he does a good job in a couple of years here, and he's going to be whisked away, right? Just like Manny Diaz was the previous DC.
Yeah, I also think for Penn State, this is going to be a really good thing. With that very public buyout Tom Allen has, I do believe they're able to pay him maybe a little less, maybe more incentivized salary, where if they hit certain goals, like maybe finally beating Ohio State as one, not taking a shot, but in the sense that maybe you can pay your other assistants more and maybe you can use some of that money to get another offensive coach, maybe a passing game coordinator. Certainly, they've done that in the past. So maybe just keep a slight eye on that. But other than that, I think Penn State is pretty much done filling out their coaching staff for next year. Sure, another job could open up, and staffs are going to always scramble throughout the recruiting period up to February. But that's really it for coaching news. Nothing too major that happened since our last cast in the transfer portal or in the coaching cycle. So, Sean, I think we're pretty safe to move on.
This was the first Saturday in the bowl cycle. But I'm going to be honest, didn't watch a single play of a single bowl. No Big Ten teams were in it, and no teams really that deserve to be talked about. But next Saturday, we've got Minnesota, Joe. No, they're after Christmas. Northwestern's in a bowl. Minnesota has a little bit of a quarterback situation that we'll get to in a future episode. But I think that's it for football, Joe. Now, before we go to basketball, we're going to talk about a ruling that mostly affects basketball. Basically, the court order that makes a second-time transfer illegal has been struck down for 14 days, which started Saturday, and players can't play in those times without penalty who were awaiting a waiver. Now, off the top of my head, I don't know any in the Big Ten that were the case, but West Virginia has a couple players like that. Primo Spears from Florida State. And if after the 14 days the second-time transfer ban is put in again, they won't lose a year of eligibility. But if they get to play the rest of the year, they will lose a year of eligibility. So we're seeing a little bit of interesting, might have these guys for a little bit and then they might go back to being on the bench. But it's just something to keep an eye out for. I don't think any teams in the Big Ten are really affected by that off the top of my head. But Joe, we've got mostly bye games before Christmas in the Big Ten. We've got a couple of good games this week, Michigan, Florida, stuff like that. But until conference play starts, I don't think there's really a high-profile non-conference game, really other than Michigan and Florida. So, Joe, why don't we get into Saturday, because Saturday was awesome in the Big Ten. Started out with my Indiana Hoosiers taking Kansas to the brink. Kansas gets away with one at Assembly Hall. But as a Hoosier fan, you got to be pretty excited about what happened there. And basically any other team doesn't pull out a win there.
No, I think Indiana played really well. I think they actually controlled the game up to probably like the halfway mark of the second half. I think that crowd was absolutely electric. I think Hunter Dickinson never experienced IU like that. I think everyone hated Hunter Dickinson in the Big Ten beforehand, but he was reminded that he is not welcome in Big Ten country. That's how I would put it. Uh, Trey Galloway, I think he's easy to highlight. I think Mackenzie Mbako showcased what he could do. I think he's always done that in the past few weeks, but to do it on this kind of stage against a national title contender is a really good sign for the Hoosiers. And I mean, metric wise, they're up to the actual 80s in KenPom now today, maybe like high 70s.
Yeah, they went up 4 spots after this game. Spread was 7.5.
Lost.
And if you had gotten a double-digit victory there, who knows how far you would have gone up. But yeah, good for the numbers. And Joe, before I go back to you, Indiana has 3 bye games before Big Ten play starts. They got to work on their numbers. They're favored by, I think, 11, 12, and 15 in those 3 games now. Get 3 20-point wins. You can get 10, 15 spots up. But I'll go back to you.
Yeah, Sean, I overall, I'm looking at Indiana right now. I can't see how especially you. I'm going to turn it right back to you, Sean. Are you how would you grade the season so far? I think it's pretty good. You're 2-0 in the conference. You probably have a quad 1 win at Michigan.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and by the end of the year, I guarantee you that'll probably be a quad 1 win.
Yeah, I think wins and losses wise, we're right where we thought we'd be. We both were on the train of that. It is definitely going to get better as the season goes along for this new look team. But the numbers aren't as good as they probably should have been. Some of the wins against the bye games were not as big as they should have been. But at the end of the day, you're still in first in the conference. And you've played 2 teams. 2 of your 3 losses are against 2 of the top 4 best teams in the country. And you can kick yourself that you should have won this game. You probably should have. You got an all-world day from your guard, Trey Galloway. It was Kansas' first true road game. They clearly showed it. And just a couple things didn't go your way down the stretch. Kansas made, their good players. Dickinson was 8 of 17 from the field. McCullough was 3 of 11. Those aren't great numbers for those guys, but they hit some huge shots late. And that's why they're so good, Bill Self. That's why he's the best coach in the country. They find ways to win when they probably don't deserve it a lot, and they didn't really. But it stinks because you had a chance. But 7-3. Don't want to say you're 10-3 going into the Big Ten because you got to take those games seriously. But if you can do that, there's at least a chance that you can make the NCAA tournament. And Auburn, too, is a lot better of a team than people think. They took Baylor to the end of the game on the first game of the year, and then they just crushed a USC team that isn't that great. But still, they're going to be ranked tomorrow in the top 25, I would think. But this would have made the NCAA tournament a whole lot more likely if you could pull this off, because Kansas looks pretty good. But foul trouble was the name of the game. Bill Self left Kevin McCullough in with 4 fouls and 8 minutes left, and Mbako got yanked. Can't really blame him for taking him out in that situation, but the offense definitely slowed down a little bit, and McCullough was able to get to the free throw line a couple times and stay in the game and keep his rhythm, and that's ultimately why Kansas ended up with the W. But Joe, had Indiana pulled this off, I think it would have been an awesome day for the Big Ten. Well, it was anyway, because a couple other teams won their big games, but that would have been such an awesome day for the Big Ten. Next, we're going to go to Detroit, Michigan State. Joe, how about them? 24-point win over Baylor. They're up by 30 points in this game. Desperation spot for the Spartans. They get the job done.
In hindsight, I don't know. I don't think I was so negative. I was not surprised that Michigan State will win, but I did not see them coming out of the gate and absolutely shellacking Baylor. Poor Kumar. I don't know if he's someone should check in on the poor guy, but I think if you're Michigan State, you must be like through the roof right now. And how about Xavier Booker actually getting some minutes? I get it was a blowout, but Tom Izzo finally played him. He was the biggest cardboard cutout. That's what he's been called in this area of the country, the biggest cardboard cutout ever since he never went into games. But I think Michigan State started the game 5 of 7 from 3. They finished 8 of 12. If they do that the rest of the year, clearly there'll be a problem. Now, is that sustainable? Absolutely not. But I think the biggest thing Michigan State missed in some of these games, Sean, is just these hot starts. They've always started games like not even so far behind, but just not in stride. When Michigan State starts in stride, this is effectively a home crowd, but nothing compares to the Izzo, and especially once it gets towards conference play. They do this at home. I don't see them losing another home game, including to Purdue. Now, am I going to overreact and say that's going to be the case? Not at all. They're still 5-5. I think they still have a lot of things to figure out, as do a lot of teams in this conference. I think it's pretty much solidified that if Tyson Walker wants 20 on a night, he's getting 20. I think if they could get consistent play out of A.J. Hoggard, get some consistent play. And I thought the bench was really good. I thought Holloman was phenomenal. I think Cohen Carr is always a problem, especially the way he could lay it down and get to the hole. I must say, Sean, I think this was the Michigan State team we were all expecting. I'm really curious to see if they continue this. They do have 3 bye games before they re-enter conference play against Penn State. But I think their next big test, Sean, not looking too far ahead, is at Northwestern, who we'll kind of talk about later on January 7th. So maybe a 3-week span for the Spartans to just get in groove, maybe get some of the freshmen going, get Beers and Booker comfortable. And if they get Kohler back anytime soon, maybe it's only looking up from here for the Spartans. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I think, like you said, this offensive day will probably not happen again, but the defensive effort can. That's what I said. I think Michigan State has to kind of not live and die, but they need to emphasize defense, because they are not a team that can score consistently enough to win high up and down games. Obviously, get out and transition off misses from the other team, but stuff like that. But Baylor has looked as good as any offense has all year and to hold them to 64 in a game with a high possession count. That's impressive, and that is sustainable. You force tough shots, teams are not going to score a lot on you. So I think Michigan State can say, all right, we got to play defense every game, and if we have even a good offensive day, we're going to win. And that is what is the sustainable part of this. Didn't really see this coming, obviously, in a desperation spot. This was a ridiculous performance, nothing that we have seen from them, but, hopefully they do play tomorrow against Oakland, 16.5-point favorites. I'd like to see 3 wins from the Spartans, none of which are close. Although Indiana State at 10-1, 63rd in KenPom last time I checked. That game might be a little bit more interesting than immediately you thought. Next game, Joe, in the order here that I have is the one that they gave us on ESPN. Ohio State beats UCLA in the CBS Sports Classic. Good performance from the Buckeyes here. Obviously, the Bruins not as good as they have been over the last couple years, but Ohio State picks up their second pretty solid win in the non-conference.
Yeah, Sean, and frankly, I think that could end up being a quad one. I don't think UCLA is that good, but
it's a quad. Neutral, I don't think it will be. But
no,
still,
maybe it's quad
win.
2. Yeah, and frankly, it negates the loss they had to Penn State. I think going 1-1 in those games is nothing to be ashamed of. Preferably, obviously, you wanted 2, because I think they really missed an opportunity in Happy Valley. I was impressed with Jamison Battle more than anyone. I almost said Jamison Williams, watching too much NFL of late. But Roddy Gale had 19. Jamison Battle, though, had hits, had some timely shots, had 14. And Felix Oxpar actually did something on offense. Normally he kind of just stands there as a defender. But if he could be a factor, maybe this team could figure some things out. Bruce Thornton had a terrible day from the field, 4 of 15. Had a very quiet 13. 0 of 5 from 3. Don't think that'll be a common factor for him. I think Ohio State still wants more out of their bench. I think, only 9 bench points is not great. I do think the Buckeyes are yet to play their best. I think defensively they have a lot to figure out. And frankly, Sean, they kind of have a similar problem that a lot of teams have is they could hit shots, but they don't hit timely shots in the sense that they'll have 4 or 5 point leads, but they'll never really stretch it out and they'll let teams hang around. It kind of happened in this game and it didn't really come back to bite them, but it definitely bit them in the Penn State game. So I think that's one thing they should figure out coming into conference play. I think it amps up immediately. They end the month in the crossroad. Sorry, not crossroads. Almost thinking country road with the game against West Virginia, who's not great, but still an annoying team to play nonetheless.
Yeah, they're going to have those players back, like I said. Kirk Reese is back. That might not be as easy of a game. And it's on the road. You could always lose a road game.
Yeah, Sean, and you got to keep this in mind. That could be a costly loss. West Virginia's 4 and 6. I really wouldn't want. I would prefer not to lose that game. And then they immediately kick off with Rutgers, Indiana, a game at Assembly Hall in Wisconsin. 2 of those 3 games are really losable for the Buckeyes. So I think they have a lot to figure out. I don't think there's any reason to be pessimistic, but I think if you're a Buckeye fan, 9 and 2, one really good win against Alabama, one missed opportunity, and then one pretty good win. I think that's about as solid a start as you would really expect. So good on the Buckeyes. What do you think?
I think the Buckeyes know who they are in good ways and bad ways. They have their rotation. Obviously, you said the players that they have can play better, but I don't think they're going to change a lot as the season goes on. They might have more individual plays, better execution, stuff like that. But what you see now from them is probably what you're going to get on a team level and like on all the team stats, like rebounding and threes and free throws and stuff like that. Obviously, individuals can have good games. You want to see more from their bench because they have probably a better bench than a lot of Big Ten teams, but they get the W here. Hopefully for them, UCLA can have a good season so that win can age well, but the Bruins are struggling so far. Next game, Joe, your Michigan Wolverines had Juwan Howard back as officially the head coach. They take care of in-state rival Eastern Michigan 83-66 at the Chrysler Center. This game was close last year, Joe, and Tyson Acuff, one of the best scorers in the country, put in 24, but Michigan back to good winning ways.
Yeah, I did the quotes for our viewers that can see that I know a lot of you listen on Spotify, but I put quotes for in-state rival. I think that was pretty hysterical. Big Ten Network to do that. I really hope they were being ironic. I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt and say they were, because they truly believe that they should be fired from BTN and banned from ever stepping foot in this state again. With that said, Sean, I think no one really cares about this game. They care about the game against Florida, which will maybe we should just get into it now. I think overall, you look at Michigan, they're 6 and 5. I think they have 2 quad one wins wrapped up. They have 1 bad loss against Long Beach State. And if you're looking, depending on the website, they're counting the Indiana one as bad. There's no way that loss is going to look that bad.
It's Indiana's best win.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's my thing.
That's just because Indiana's numbers aren't great. Once Indiana gets, that'll be no worse than a quad 2 or a high quad 2.
Yeah, and so with that said, for Michigan, you haven't done anything to really shoot yourself in the foot in terms of the big picture of the season. Now, in 3 games, Memphis, Indiana, and Oregon, you have. I think Florida, and you win this, you right a lot of wrongs, really. From going from 4 and 5 after blowing a game at home against Indiana to, winning a game at Iowa, no one really expected you to win. I think Tuesday's the most important game of the season so far for Michigan. I really mean that.
I think Michigan should be favored in this game. It's a true neutral. It's in North Carolina. Florida, Michigan. We'll say it's going to be even crowd-wise. I
Right.
don't know if it'll be 60-40 or something like that. But Florida's a team that hasn't really blown out bad teams, but they've hung with some good teams. They lost to an okay Virginia team in Charlotte, so probably a little closer to Virginia. They lost to a Baylor team who's pretty good, but they hung with them, and then they lost on the road to Wake Forest. All those obviously pretty explainable, but they haven't been able to shake some bye games. So, I think Michigan should be favored. I think Michigan is the better team. Got a couple transfers from up here, Joe, in Florida. Walter Clayton Jr. is their best player, 16.5 points a game.
Should have stayed with Rick.
Could have. He was between the Johnnies in Florida. He was the MAC Player of the Year last year at Iona. He's got an interesting shot. He kind of brings it over here, but he knocks him down, and he's their best player. And then Tyree Samuel, the Seton Hall transfer, former teammates with Trey Jackson on Michigan. He is their second leading scorer with 13. But Riley Kugel, the only other double-digit scorer. So, I think Doug can at least draw with Walter Clayton, and then I think he would take Michigan's other 4 versus Florida's other 4. So, ESPN's giving Florida a 58% chance to win. I think Michigan should be favored by a point or two, especially how they looked in their last 2 games. Michigan, if they play like that, I think they'll get the job done.
And Sean, we'll end this Michigan segment with this. If you rated them as a 4 out of 10 at the end of our last episode, so a bunch of questions regarding if they do beat Florida, does that 4 go up?
Definitely, probably 5, maybe 5.5. You need to get these 2 games just for wins and losses purposes.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't lost any. Even Long Beach State is not a horrendous team. They are going to be in the high hundreds, maybe even crack the top 100. But you just need more W's than losses because can't really expect better than maybe 12-8 in the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an important one. Florida's a team that is hanging right around the bubble in early projections, and who knows what'll happen there. But really important. Season's not over if you come up short, but it's kind of like a not really a Baylor situation like Michigan State was, but it's a good chance to get a good win. But that's all we have for Michigan, Joe. We're going to go to probably the biggest college basketball game of the season so far, and that took place at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. That was number 3 Purdue, sort of hosting number 1 Arizona. Obviously, very pro-Purdue crowd on the neutral floor. And the Boilers get the job done, 92-84. They lead by 11 at halftime. They kind of pulled away at the end of the first half. They stretched their lead out pretty big, I think almost to 20 or maybe over 20 in the second half. Arizona comes back, but Purdue holds them off. Really, really impressive game from the Boilers here, and they will be ranked number 1 overall tomorrow.
God, I was kind of thinking on my walk today, if Purdue hits threes like they did today, and again, not sustainable. But Fletcher Lawyer, 5 of 9, and also, Zach Edey wasn't even the leading scorer, wasn't even close to being the leading scorer. He was the 3rd leading scorer, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. Braden Smith, too, 4 of 7 from 3. And now, is that going to happen every game? Of course not. But if Lawyer and Smith hit a healthy amount of threes, maybe even go like 35-40% combined, which isn't unreasonable at all. I have a really hard time thinking anyone beats Purdue, and we've said this last year at times. If they hit threes, they're unbeatable. I don't really know what to make of this Purdue team because I think they're still really good. I think they're a top 4 team in this country at worst. I'm more perplexed than anything. I thought this would have been a closer game, and I think I'm also perplexed. I'm also scared of Purdue in the sense that offensively, if they hit their shots, they're unstoppable because then you know what the default option is? Oh, we'll just give it to the National Player of the Year.
Yep.
And I think that's I think Big Ten teams kind of took notice because I think the Northwestern loss kind of gave some people this idea that Purdue is human. I still think they are pretty machine-like, to be honest with you. Yeah, I think this game reminded the country of that.
Yeah, the formula to beat Purdue is what Northwestern did, and it'll probably happen 2 or 3 more times the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And if Edey's gonna get 25 a game or 23 or something like that, but the formula was to not let anybody else get 20.
Yeah.
And Purdue has had that every game this year. And in this game, they had both Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer get 27 and 26. That is scary. Obviously, this was a great performance, and I'm not going to say not repeatable, but definitely not sustainable. I'm sure they can do this a couple times more. But Arizona shot 51% from the field and really wasn't in the game. That is pretty crazy to me. Arizona is still really good. Obviously, Caleb Love at 29, Shad Johnson 24, who just made they're both those players made the top 10 transfers that I put out on the Instagram a couple days ago. But it was a really spectacular performance from Purdue. My Peacock was actually bugging out a little bit, so I kept lagging out of this game. But I watched most of it, and Purdue, they get good looks. Umar Ballo was supposed to be able to cover Edey one-on-one. Clearly didn't do it. But to get a C, maybe B minus game from Edey and still win against the team that was ranked number 1 overall, pretty impressive from Purdue. This is what can happen when they play well.
Yeah, Sean, and I'm very thankful to Win Streaks who sponsored us in the past and to Jersey Kings. Don't think we'll ever get an endorsement from Peacock or anything like that, but I promise you we won't be endorsing Peacock either based on some of their performances in both football and basketball this year. But with that said, Sean, I think it's safe to say Purdue's still the team to beat, not only in the Big Ten, but I argue in the country after this. I think the Northwestern game is going to be a semi-flaw, not even their resume, just on their reputation, which is completely different. But no, if they continue on this track, it's hard to see them losing any more than, like you said, 3 or 4 more games this whole year. So
Joe, we'll turn the page to Northwestern, like you said.
mm-hmm.
Interesting week for them. They do lose to Chicago State, who by many measurements is one of the worst teams in Division I. So what can happen, though, you get a couple of, in those sorts of games, every team that plays you believes that they can win. Now, that might only last until the first media timeout when you're down 13-2, but every team starts the game believing that you can win. And every media timeout that's still the case, that they're still in the game, they still believe that they can win. You get a couple guys who make shots. Sleepy crowd, probably not many people there during the week, and you can lose these games. Chicago State is an independent. They've kind of been the whipping boy of bye games in the Big Ten. Indiana's played them a couple times. None of them have been even close, but they get a program-changing victory for them here. But Northwestern turns around, wins a road game against fellow Chicago school DePaul, who is equally as bad as Louisville and Notre Dame and some of the worst Power 5 teams ever. I guess Northwestern, you got to move on from this 1-1 week because it wasn't what you thought.
Sean, I think we could rip Northwestern at length for their really 2 performances. They did not look good against DePaul either. Does that, because I believe they only have 1 quad 1 win. Maybe the Dayton one could stay that, but I doubt it.
I think Dayton's going to win the A10, so that might age well, that win.
But 1-30, do they stay at 30? We could debate that later.
Probably not. Probably
in National Cast, probably not. Does that loss quad 4 cancel out the Purdue one? And the only reason I ask that, because normally it does, it's just Purdue's the number 1 team in the country. Does it in your mind? What do you think?
I don't think so. They're just 2 things that are both going to be on the resume. In terms, I think you'd rather have those on than both off, if that's what you're saying. I think you take the Purdue win and the bad loss than neither. But you've got an Arizona State game on the road in Phoenix. Again, semi-neutral game. Arizona State's not that good. You can win essentially a road game there. Jackson State, and then Big Ten play. So, non-conference hasn't been great for Northwestern. You lose to a Mississippi State team who is probably on the outside looking in right now. But the Chicago State loss stings because you really could have gone into Big Ten play with just 1 loss. Well, obviously the Purdue win, but they're 1-0. That was their only Big Ten game. It really stinks, that Chicago State loss. You see it sometimes. You see it with Eastern Illinois beating Iowa either last year or the year before. You just can't write it off. It's going to be with you the rest of the year, and you just got to hope that you can beat Jackson State to avoid another one.
Yeah, Sean, and let's just address this just from Gus, who I believe is a Purdue fan. And this actually benefited Purdue, so I don't know why you're complaining, Gus. Should teams stop scheduling neutral games? And he puts it in quotes. That's what I've been quoting the whole episode. Against teams with significant home court advantages. Yeah, I think so. I think it's kind of stupid because if you're gonna have that kind of environment, when you just want the road game as is, meaning if you win that, you have a 1-75 margin as opposed to neutral, you will have the 1-50 margin, right? Which is there's a fine line between 1-50 and 1-75. Because 50 to 75 aren't necessarily bubble teams. They could be teams that are, 16-16 or 500 in a really tough conference. So yeah, I think that's kind of stupid to do if you're an athletic director. I get the money angle, but from a competitive standpoint, if I was going to look at it that way, like I do, I think it's kind of dumb. What do you think, Sean?
I think we can have a whole episode on this in the off season, Joe, because I think barring Maui and all the big MTEs, Champions Classic, Jimmy V Classic, those sorts of things, I think we need to stop scheduling so many neutral games. These on-campus arenas in these atmospheres are unbelievable. Kansas at Indiana was an unbelievable atmosphere. If that game had been at even at Gainbridge or Dallas or Louisville or something like that, they just wouldn't be the same. I do think that neutral games take away from the atmosphere, and I don't think teams want to. I just think unless you're a brand name, top 20 brand, you're not going to get people to fill your stadium unless it's a pretend home game for you. And I know a lot of these teams have deals with the arenas that are nearest to them. And the atmosphere just isn't the same. I think on-campus games, there's nothing like it in sports, in football or basketball, really. And I just think that we do need to cool it a little bit on the neutral games. Indiana's playing Kentucky next year at Rupp, and then the year after is Gainbridge, and then I think it's Rupp, and then Assembly Hall. So I think that might be a little different because Indiana's pretty close to Gainbridge, and then obviously that big rivalry. But I want to hear your thoughts on it because I think it's something that needs to be talked about. There's no reason that Arizona State and Northwestern should be playing at an NBA arena for the Phoenix Suns rather than on campus.
Well, I look at it this way, Sean. If Michigan plays Penn State and beats them, they're playing at the Palestra this year. That's only winning at a neutral versus winning at Penn State. And you can't tell me the Palestra is not going to be predominantly Penn State fans, especially with the way their basketball program's kind of been more popular on the campus as time's gone on. So uh, I just think the benefit of winning is completely like disincentivized, especially if you're not playing like a 1-30 team. Because if Michigan beats Florida, let's say they were playing in Orlando, for example. Say they beat Florida in Orlando, right? And Florida becomes like the 53rd best team in the country. That's not a quad one win then, as opposed to Florida's like the 67th best team in the country, and they beat them in Gainesville. Like it just makes no sense. Because if you're going to beat them at a neutral where it's predominantly their fans, and frankly, it's probably louder at a neutral with more people, you're probably going to beat them at their arena too. So I don't know. I just think the benefit is significantly dampened if you don't. Not dampened. I made up a word, but significantly like you're disincentivized. So I don't like it. I don't like it at all, Sean.
I think that we saw it. I noticed it last year. The committee in the past has really rewarded wins away from home, and they kind of switched that to road wins last year.
Mm-hmm.
IU had a road win at Xavier, road win at Purdue, road win at Illinois, and a couple more. And they were kind of propped up into the protected seats because of that. Other teams had good neutral wins, but I think it was good that the committee said, all right, these are not the same as road wins because on building interest in your team. Obviously, the brand names don't have to do that, but in Arizona State, they could use a home game against a power conference opponent. I know the students won't quite be there on December 20th, but getting people to your campus, getting recruits to see games on your campus, that's what college sports is about. So I do think they need to cool it a little bit with the neutral games. But obviously Jimmy V and Champions Classic and all the MTEs are really awesome and fun. And I'm not saying those should change, but these standalone neutral games off campus, really just go and play them on campus. Obviously, IU went to Kansas last year, and Kansas went to Indiana this year. These are why those atmospheres are so great, and I think why college basketball is so awesome. But Joe, we got 5 minutes left here. Just want to talk about Nebraska real quick, and then we maybe get to a question or two. Nebraska beats Kansas State on the road today. Kansas State was winning at halftime, and then they were stuck on 40 points. I did not watch the game, Joe, but I did some math. 1 point in over 10 minutes of action, and Nebraska gets a 16-point victory on the road against a Big 12 team that made the Elite Eight last year. Nebraska putting together a pretty solid season so far.
Yeah, Sean, I don't know what to make of this. I think that's probably a quad. That's definitely a quad one, but I don't know about probably. They they're interesting, man. They lost that game to Minnesota. That was really bad. I do think that won't bite them that much, though, to be honest. They got absolutely owned by their in-state rival Creighton. They beat Michigan State, but was that the same Michigan State team we saw in Detroit? Not even close. I I really don't think we're gonna know about Nebraska until they play Indiana, Wisconsin in January to open the real stretch of Big Ten. They play North Dakota and South Carolina State. I guess I will know if they lose those games, but
They shouldn't.
I don't know. I think we gave them like a 4 or 5 last week of making the tournament. I say maybe that's like a 5.5 now. You know, what really cost them last year was losing some of these dumb games to start the year. The only dumb game they kind of lost was Minnesota. I'm not kind of lost. I still like such a teenager. But it's a Big Ten. Yeah, exactly. You write that off pretty easily. So really no damage done. In fact, that's probably a really good start to the year. You have a win against a perennial Big Ten powerhouse in Michigan State, and you have a huge road win against the team that was in the Elite Eight last year. So really good for the Cornhuskers. Maybe they've been the most surprising team in a good way in that sense. Because I think we took Nebraska semi-seriously in terms of being a presence in this conference, but maybe not so much as a tournament contender. But now they certainly are one now.
I think when we talked about Nebraska, either their schedule or the Big Ten preview, Joe, we did say let's get one of Creighton or Kansas State. Let's get one of those games, and then you can make the tournament with a 10-10, 11-9 season. They did it. They got one of them. Now Kansas State hasn't been as good as people thought, but they're still a Big 12 team that will not finish near the bottom of that conference. So Kansas State turns it up. That win gets better. It's a road win. Remember, committee likes road wins. I think Nebraska have passed the benchmarks that they have to have a chance to make the tournament. I didn't watch this game, but Kansas State shooting 26% from the field. That's probably just a bad day at the office. And Kaluma, 2 of 10. Cam Carter, 4 of 17. Tyler Perry, 3 of 11. These are all pretty good players. And I guess you can play good defense a couple of the possessions, but for a Division I college basketball player to miss that many shots, chances are a couple of them are good looks. But reason to be optimistic for Nebraska. So, Joe, why don't we end off this episode with a question?
Yeah, Sean, we'll do one for each sport because the first one I'm just going to answer right away. Do you believe Rico, who's like that big TikToker on transfer portal? I don't know if you've seen him, Sean. He's kind of come up in some of our pages. And this is my bad, from Jake A., who I assume is a Buckeye. Do you believe there's any truth to the Caleb Williams to Ohio State rumors? I understand we say where there's smoke, there's fire.
I don't know
I just think that is too good to be true if you're an Ohio State fan. That you get both Marv back, because I'm assuming Caleb would only come if Marv came back. You get both Marvin Harrison Jr., a top 3 pick of the draft, back with the number 1 pick in the draft from USC after this transfer. The only thing that gives me slight pause from just absolutely laughing this off the face of the earth is that transfer rule. But I just don't think so. I think you're going to end up with maybe a Cam Ward, maybe Malik Murphy, who just entered the portal from Texas. And if not, you're going to end up with what? A 5-star in Aaron Nolan and Leakin Keenholz, who a lot of people are high on. Maybe Devin Brown goes off in the Cotton Bowl. I don't think there's any reason to float these kind of theories. But if there is some truth to them, JK, I could say you were the first people on it, and good on you. Sean, this one I'm going to give directly to you. Uh, this is actually this is probably a pretty loaded question, so I don't know how to say this from Nico. Do you think Indiana has done enough right now to be given the benefit of the doubt to make the tournament? So what is he saying? He's probably saying, have they shown you enough? Maybe that's how I phrase it.
Let me say this. I think they've shown enough to think that they might show enough in the future.
Okay.
Because they, missing senior point guard Xavier Johnson, they basically won the guards battle against Kansas. DeJuan Harris and Kevin McCullough and Elmarco Jackson. They Gabe Cupps and Trey Galloway and CJ Gunn, and they basically won the battle of the guards. So I think if Xavier can come back, they didn't really win the front court, which is kind of why they lost. Khalil Ware missed a lot of shots, and Renew struggled with fouls, and only I think he ended up with 12 or 13 points. But I think that if you can get Xavier back, there, I'm hearing that he will be back in one of these bye games, and we'll get some run before Big Ten play starts. I think if you can improve, if he can show that team is better with him on the floor, then I think you can get to a spot where you will be given the benefit of the doubt if you finish 9-11 or 11-9 in the Big Ten with a couple big wins, no bad losses. I think you can get to that point, but at this point, I think you'd have to lean towards no. They haven't really blown anybody out.
Okay. Well, we're going to answer some more on our next podcast. There are a bunch in here that are going to be relevant. I just try to get the timely questions out. Let's just answer this one, Sean. Do you want to make a prediction on the Florida-Michigan game?
79-73 Michigan.
I think that's just too good to be true. I'm going to go 65-63 Florida.
Yeah,
and I think Michigan will have yet another late game collapse.
If the score's in the 60s,
they need to prove it to everyone that they can win these close games against teams with a pulse.
I do think if the game is in the 60s, that's not a great sign for the Wolverines.
No, that's why I think it'll go Florida's way. But no, I've said my piece on this cast. So Sean, take us home.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Be sure to tune in to Sports Daily College Basketball with Kumar probably tomorrow, and then Nutshell later this week sometime with me and Joe. So for Sean, Vowells, Joe Meade, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.